Ethan Parker adjusted his backpack nervously as he stepped off the curb, waiting for the morning bus. The crisp Portland air carried the scent of coffee and damp pavement, and Ethan's mind was halfway to his usual routine at the tech startup. That was when he saw her. Claire Henderson stood at the opposite side of the street, casually leaning against the bus shelter with her tote bag slung over one shoulder. Sunlight caught her hair in a golden halo, and Ethan's breath caught as if he had been struck. He blinked once, twice, hoping it was a trick of the light. But no, there she was, reading a worn paperback with a focus that made the world around her seem to fade. Ethan felt his heart skip a beat, a rapid, stuttering rhythm that he wasn't used to. He quickly looked away, pretending to check his phone, but curiosity had him peeking again. Her laughter floated across the street as she glanced at a passing car full of laughing teenagers, and Ethan felt something stir inside him, a strange mixture of awe and longing. He tried to rationalize it. It was just a morning bus stop, just a stranger. Yet something about her presence demanded attention. Ethan had never experienced a moment like this, a quiet explosion of awareness that made the early morning rush of Portland feel like a symphony composed just for her. He wanted to say something, anything, a greeting, a compliment, but his courage dissolved into nerves the instant he opened his mouth. Instead, he offered the faintest nod, which went unnoticed, and tried to focus on the approaching bus. As the bus hissed to a stop and he stepped inside, Ethan couldn't shake the image of Claire. The world outside the window seemed ordinary and gray compared to the vivid energy she had brought into his life in that single glance. By the time he arrived at work, he knew one thing: he would be seeing her again. And next time, he hoped, maybe he'd find the courage to say hello. Ethan's life at the tech startup was a study in monotony, punctuated by awkward encounters and constant reminders of his timidity. The office buzzed with energy, creative brainstorming sessions, keyboards clattering, the hum of coffee machines, but Ethan often felt like a ghost drifting through it all. He arrived at his desk, a modest cubicle adorned with a couple of potted plants and stacks of carefully organized notebooks. Ethan's manager, Lisa, breezed past him, tossing a last-minute project onto his desk. "Ethan, can you handle this by noon?" she asked without looking up. Ethan nodded, swallowing a nervous yes that barely emerged. His coworkers shot glances, some amused, some dismissive, as he hurried to meet the deadline. He wanted to speak up during meetings, to pitch ideas he knew could shine, but every time the words reached the tip of his tongue, they froze. Instead, he nodded enthusiastically at everyone else's suggestions, offering polite affirmations while his own thoughts remained locked away. By lunch, Ethan's self-consciousness had grown heavier. A coworker leaned over and claimed the last slice of pizza, jokingly patting Ethan on the back. "Don't worry, maybe next time," he said, and Ethan forced a chuckle, feeling the sting of invisibility. Even with the endless chatter and energy around him, Ethan felt small, unnoticed. The bright downtown office, with its open floor plan and panoramic views of the city, seemed like a stage for everyone else but him. He kept checking the clock, yearning for the brief respite of his commute home, which now held a single bright thought: Claire. She was the one spark of color in the gray routine of his life. Every interaction he imagined with her, every conversation he hoped to have, made his workday more bearable. Yet he remained the same timid, overlooked figure, unable to step into the spotlight, even for someone who made his heart race like Claire. After work, Ethan found himself walking the familiar streets of downtown Portland, the crisp air carrying the scent of roasted coffee and autumn leaves. He couldn't help it, his steps subconsciously led him toward Claire's usual bus stop. The moment he saw her, casually waiting with a tote bag over one shoulder, his chest tightened. He followed at a careful distance as she moved through the city, careful not to intrude, but unable to resist observing. From Powell's City of Books to the waterfront, he watched her navigate Portland with a grace that seemed effortless. She wandered the aisles of the bookstore, flipping pages thoughtfully, sometimes smiling to herself as she read. Ethan's eyes lingered, drinking in every small gesture, memorizing the curve of her smile and the tilt of her head. Despite the exhilaration, Ethan's heart raced with anxiety. What if she noticed him? What if he looked like a stalker? These thoughts battled against the simple joy of being near her, of existing in the same city at the same time. He adjusted his pace, ducked behind corners, and pretended to window shop at cafes he didn't plan to enter. He imagined small conversations, asking her about a book she was holding, sharing a joke, even a simple hello. Each fantasy played out perfectly in his mind, but when he looked at her, reality intruded with his usual nervousness. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something was intoxicating about this quiet connection, this invisible thread linking them. As the sun began to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the waterfront, Ethan knew he had to go home. Yet he lingered a moment longer, silently observing Claire as she gazed at the rippling water, utterly unaware of the young man who admired her from afar. With a sigh, he finally turned, promising himself that someday, somehow, he would gather the courage to step out from the shadows and speak to her. Ethan lingered on the corner of Burnside Street, peering through the tall windows of Powell's City of Books. The warm golden light spilling from inside made the rows of bookshelves look like an inviting maze. And there she was, Claire Henderson, completely absorbed in her search for the perfect read. Ethan ducked behind a display of travel guides, trying to remain inconspicuous. His heart pounded as he watched her move from shelf to shelf, gently running her fingers along the spines of books, occasionally pulling one out to examine its cover. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, graceful, as though even choosing a book required careful consideration. Ethan's admiration surged, and he had to bite his lip to stop himself from smiling like an idiot. He felt ridiculous, hiding like a spy in a bookstore. But the thought of accidentally bumping into her, of saying something awkward and ruining the magic, kept him rooted to the spot. He watched as she paused in the poetry section, holding a small volume close to her chest, her lips curling into a faint smile. Ethan imagined himself walking over, striking up a conversation about the book, maybe asking her opinion, but his courage faltered at the very idea. Instead, he lingered, trying to blend into the background while taking mental notes. The way her hair fell over her shoulders, the light in her eyes as she read, the small laugh she let out at a particularly clever line. Powell's City of Books, with its towering shelves and labyrinthine aisles, had never seemed so magical or so full of possibility. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, it was hard to tell, and Ethan finally forced himself to step back, pressing his hands into his pockets as if that could steady his nerves. He watched Claire leave the poetry section, then drift toward the cafe at the back of the store. Ethan stayed hidden for a few more moments, savoring the view, before slipping out into the street, his mind already replaying every detail. The city around him felt duller somehow, less vivid than the warmth he had just witnessed inside Powell's. He walked home with a quiet determination forming in his chest. Someday, somehow, he would speak to her, and not just from a distance. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the Portland waterfront, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and lavender. Ethan found himself wandering along the river path, hands buried in his jacket pockets, his eyes constantly seeking Claire. And, as if guided by fate, he spotted her leaning on the railing, staring out at the water with a thoughtful expression. Ethan slowed, pretending to tie his shoe while stealing glances. The river shimmered under the fading light, reflecting the golden glow onto Claire's hair, making it look almost ethereal. For a moment, Ethan imagined that she existed solely in this perfect frame of light and color, and his chest tightened with longing. He envisioned conversations he might have, laughter shared over coffee, long walks through the park, quiet evenings by the river. In his mind, they navigated the city together, discovering secret corners and hidden gems. Each imagined scenario ended with Claire smiling at him, leaning closer, her eyes sparkling with affection. Ethan's feet shuffled closer to the railing, yet he maintained a safe distance. He felt like an observer in a beautiful storybook, watching a heroine whose life he desperately wished to be part of. And somewhere deep down, he realized that his fascination wasn't just about attraction. It was about the world she seemed to inhabit, a world bright, curious, and alive. But reality intruded as always. Claire turned slightly, and for a brief heartbeat, their eyes might have met. Ethan ducked instinctively, feeling his face heat with embarrassment. He laughed softly to himself, shaking his head. He was nothing more than a shadow, a background character in her life, and yet the dream he held refused to fade. As the sun dipped lower and the lights of the waterfront began to twinkle, Ethan turned away reluctantly, the imagined future still dancing in his mind. He walked home with a new resolve, to transform himself from the timid observer into someone worthy of stepping into her world. The thought of actually talking to her, really talking to her, made his heart race. But for the first time, it wasn't just fear that raced, it was hope. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Claire finally noticed him, really noticed him. Ethan Parker, usually buried in his phone or nervously fumbling with his backpack, had been following the same routine for weeks, always keeping a cautious distance. He didn't think anyone would ever recognize him among the morning crowd at the downtown bus stop, yet there he was, consistent in his silent admiration. Claire leaned against the shelter, sipping from her travel mug, her eyes scanning the crowd, and then, like a flash of recognition, she caught sight of him. Ethan froze mid-step, glancing around nervously as though the universe had just exposed him. But instead of embarrassment or confrontation, Claire felt a warm amusement blossom inside her. Something was endearing about his awkwardness, the careful way he tried to make himself invisible, yet couldn't help watching her. Over the next few days, she observed him with quiet curiosity. He adjusted his backpack nervously, pretended to check his phone, and even started lingering near the bookstore or cafe she sometimes frequented. Every small, tentative gesture, the way he ducked behind a lamppost or hesitated before crossing the street, made her smile. She realized he wasn't dangerous, wasn't intrusive. He was simply shy, painfully self-conscious, and utterly captivated by her. For Claire, the revelation sparked a mix of amusement and intrigue. She found herself looking forward to these encounters, wondering what Ethan might do next. The thought of him thinking she was unaware of his feelings made the little games all the more charming. Quietly, she decided to let him continue. If he wanted to admire her from afar, so be it. She would enjoy the slow, teasing dance he was performing without ever directly engaging. From that day on, she started to anticipate his presence. The hesitant glance from across the street, the awkward fumbling near her favorite cafe, the little signs of nervous energy that made him so human, so real. She didn't need him to speak yet. Just knowing he cared enough to notice her without saying a word was enough to keep her entertained. Claire had discovered the subtle power she held over Ethan, and she couldn't resist using it for her own quiet amusement. She started small, planting tiny seeds of playful interaction without ever addressing his crush directly. A soft smile here, a raised eyebrow there, enough to make him second-guess himself, enough to keep him guessing whether she was aware. At the bus stop, she would occasionally shift her gaze to him just as he thought he was hidden behind the crowd. She noticed him stiffen, glance away, and try to appear casual. She caught herself smiling more than once as he fumbled with his umbrella or dropped a stray notebook, a blush creeping across his cheeks. During lunch breaks near the waterfront, she sometimes accidentally walked past him, letting her coat brush his arm ever so slightly. Ethan would freeze mid-step, mumbling a quiet apology or a nervous laugh, pretending it was nothing. Claire couldn't help but feel a little thrill at his reaction. It was subtle, unspoken, and completely harmless. Even inside Powell's, she would leave books slightly askew on the shelves or whisper to herself as she browsed, knowing full well he would notice. Each moment was a small game of cat and mouse, a dance performed in silence. Claire didn't want to crush his shy nature, didn't want to overwhelm him. She simply wanted to enjoy the suspense, to let the tension simmer until he was ready to step forward himself. For Ethan, every encounter became a puzzle, a test he wasn't sure he could pass. But for Claire, the silent games were lighthearted entertainment, a way to connect without words, to communicate in the language of glances and gestures. She relished the knowledge that, somewhere out there, someone admired her with such earnestness, and that in itself was quietly enchanting. Even inside Powell's, she would leave books slightly askew on the shelves or whisper to herself as she browsed, knowing full well he would notice. Each moment was a small game of cat and mouse, a dance performed in silence. Claire didn't want to crush his shy nature, didn't want to overwhelm him. She simply wanted to enjoy the suspense, to let the tension simmer until he was ready to step forward himself. For Ethan, every encounter became a puzzle, a test he wasn't sure he could pass. But for Claire, the silent games were lighthearted entertainment, a way to connect without words, to communicate in the language of glances and gestures. She relished the knowledge that, somewhere out there, someone admired her with such earnestness, and that in itself was quietly enchanting. Ethan's days began to revolve around Claire more than he cared to admit. Each sighting, each brief encounter from a distance reinforced his growing fascination and his own self-doubt. He walked the streets of Portland with an almost mechanical routine, keeping just far enough away to remain invisible, yet close enough to watch her laugh, move, and breathe life into the city around him. He trailed her past Powell's, down the waterfront, through the tiny coffee shops and hidden alleyways she favored. He memorized the way she tilted her head when reading, the way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight, the little gestures she made when she thought no one was watching. Each detail felt precious, intimate, yet frustratingly unattainable. But the longer he observed, the more his own insecurities grew. He compared himself to Ryan Caldwell, the confident co-worker who seemed to command attention effortlessly. He imagined Claire enjoying Ryan's charm, his boldness, and his smooth ease in conversation. The contrast made Ethan feel smaller, weaker, less capable of earning her attention. Every stumble, every nervous glance he forced himself to make seemed to confirm his fears. Yet he couldn't stop. Even when self-consciousness and embarrassment threatened to drive him away, something deep inside kept him following her. There was a quiet hope, a fantasy, that if he stayed just a little longer, something might change. Something might give him a chance to step out from the shadows. Each day ended with him retreating to his apartment, replaying his observations, analyzing every movement, every smile. And even though his mind was riddled with doubts, the thought of Claire waiting somewhere in the city, oblivious to the silent longing she had inspired, kept him tethered to the streets, always watching, always hoping. It happened on a bright Tuesday morning at Claire's workplace, a cozy, bustling co-working space near downtown Portland. Ethan had wandered nearby on his routine commute, hoping to catch a glimpse of her during her lunch break. He spotted her across the street, animatedly talking to someone new, a man with an easy smile and a confident stride. Ryan Caldwell. Ethan froze, his stomach tightening as he took in the newcomer. Ryan's presence was magnetic. His laughter was loud but genuine, his gestures fluid, and the casual tilt of his head suggested he was completely at ease in the world. He held a cup of coffee in one hand and gestured dramatically with the other as he spoke, clearly drawing Claire into the conversation with his effortless charm. Ethan's first instinct was to hide, ducking behind a lamppost as he watched the two interact. Ryan's voice carried, teasing and confident, eliciting laughter from Claire that made Ethan's chest ache. The way Ryan looked at her, attentive, relaxed, and self-assured, was like a spotlight highlighting everything Ethan feared he lacked. Every small movement of Ryan's seemed rehearsed by nature itself. The slight lean forward, the casual hand on his hip, the quick joke that drew a genuine smile from Claire. Ethan's eyes darted away briefly, overwhelmed by a mix of admiration, frustration, and a creeping sense of inadequacy. He knew Ryan was no villain, just another person, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being invisible, irrelevant, and entirely outclassed. As Ryan waved goodbye and walked away with a confident swing of his shoulders, Ethan's mind churned. He replayed every detail, every smile, every interaction, and realized one stark truth: Ryan had everything he didn't. He wasn't just a rival, he was the embodiment of everything Ethan feared he would never be. And yet, despite the sinking feeling in his chest, a small, stubborn spark flickered inside Ethan. He refused to let Ryan's presence dictate his life completely. One day, he thought, he would find a way to stand tall, maybe even enough to finally speak to Claire without tripping over his own words. For days after Ryan's arrival, Ethan couldn't escape the feeling of constant comparison. Every time he saw Ryan and Claire laughing together at the bus stop, Powell's, or even the waterfront, a knot tightened in his stomach. Ryan seemed so effortlessly confident, every word carefully balanced between humor and charm, while Ethan felt trapped in the invisible cage of his own awkwardness. Ethan began replaying moments in his mind, cataloging every perceived flaw. The way he stammered when ordering coffee, the way his voice wavered during casual conversations, even the slight hunch in his posture, all seemed magnified whenever Ryan was near. He tried to rationalize it, reminding himself that Ryan was simply bold, not necessarily better. But rational thoughts did little to ease the ache of inadequacy that gnawed at him daily. At work, Ethan noticed Claire glancing toward the street where Ryan often lingered. The sight of Ryan offering Claire a ride on his sleek electric scooter made Ethan's heart sink. He pictured her laughing, holding on to Ryan's arm as they zipped through the streets, and he felt a pang of helplessness he couldn't ignore. Every attempt at gathering courage, small gestures, imagined conversations, even accidental eye contact, faded in the shadow of Ryan's charisma. Yet, amid the self-doubt, Ethan's admiration for Ryan sparked an unlikely motivation. He realized he needed to do more than silently pine from afar. He needed guidance, a plan, something that could transform him from timid bystander to someone who could step into the light. Ethan's reflection in the bus window that evening showed a nervous, slightly hunched figure, but beneath the timid exterior, a determination had begun to grow. If Ryan represented the world of confidence he lacked, then perhaps with effort he could carve out his own version, one that might finally allow him to approach Claire on his own terms. Ethan leaned against a lamppost near the waterfront, sipping a lukewarm coffee and pretending to scroll through his phone, though his eyes were glued to the scene across the street. Claire was laughing, and with her, of course, was Ryan Caldwell, the seemingly perfect, effortlessly confident man who had become Ethan's constant reminder of his own shortcomings. Ryan's electric scooter hummed quietly as he maneuvered it smoothly through the streets, Claire perched behind him, arms loosely draped around his waist. Her laughter carried across the wind, clear and melodic, and Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Every small gesture Ryan made, from the playful way he glanced over his shoulder to the confident ease with which he navigated the curves of Portland streets, was a demonstration of everything Ethan felt he could never be. He shifted uncomfortably, wishing he dared to approach, but even the thought of calling out to Claire felt impossible. Instead, he followed them at a safe distance, weaving through the crowded sidewalks and ducking behind street vendors when they glanced around. He felt invisible, an outsider peeking into a world he desperately wanted to join. As Ryan handed Claire a coffee at a street corner cafe, Ethan noticed the way she smiled at him, leaning in slightly to hear his joke. A pang of jealousy struck him so sharply that he almost dropped his own cup. He knew he couldn't compete, at least not yet. And yet, despite the sting of inadequacy, he couldn't tear his eyes away. Watching her happy, even with someone else, was a bittersweet comfort. By the time Ryan dropped Claire back at the bus stop, Ethan was left in a mix of longing and admiration. He adjusted his backpack, took a deep breath, and reminded himself, one day he'd have his own chance. A small, stubborn spark of determination flickered in his chest. He would need more than luck to win Claire's attention, but maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be the man he secretly hoped to be. Back at the tech startup, Ethan's self-doubt followed him like a shadow. Ryan's presence, combined with his ongoing crush on Claire, made every interaction feel more intimidating than usual. The office, normally a place of routine and quiet anonymity, now seemed like a minefield. Every glance, every joke, every casual comment carried the potential for embarrassment. Ethan tried to participate in meetings, but his voice always faltered at the crucial moment. Ideas that had seemed brilliant in his mind came out stammered, half-formed, or drowned beneath the louder, more assertive opinions of coworkers. Lisa, his manager, was patient but brusque, often moving on quickly when Ethan hesitated. Each tiny oversight chipped away at his already fragile self-confidence. During lunch, he watched Ryan effortlessly command attention at a small table, Claire leaning in to listen, her laughter filling the space around them. Ethan poked at his salad, wishing he could join the conversation without tripping over his words. Simple social interactions, a casual joke, a friendly suggestion, even saying hello, felt like monumental tasks. Every failure reinforced the notion that he was inadequate, unworthy of attention, and wholly ordinary compared to Ryan's charm. Even small gestures felt risky. A misstep, a wrong word, a nervous glance could betray him. He felt trapped in a cycle, wanting to be noticed, craving connection, yet unable to act without fear of embarrassment. He observed quietly, his desire to impress Claire warring with his instinct to remain invisible. By the end of the day, Ethan's shoulders were heavy, weighed down by insecurity. Yet, as he packed his bag to leave, he reminded himself of one thing. If he didn't change, he would always be stuck on the sidelines. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination flickered, an acknowledgement that he needed guidance, strategy, and courage if he ever hoped to step into Claire's world on his own terms. Ethan Parker stood in front of the small motorcycle dealership, staring at the sleek, jet-black bike as if it were a golden ticket to Claire Henderson's heart. The salesman, a grinning man in a leather jacket, rattled off technical jargon about torque, horsepower, and street cred. Ethan nodded along, pretending to understand, his mind entirely focused on the image of Claire perched behind him, laughing as they zipped through Portland's streets. "This one'll turn heads," the salesman said, winking. Ethan's stomach fluttered. That was exactly what he needed, an instant boost of confidence, a way to compete with Ryan's effortless charm. Before thinking too much, he signed the papers, purchased the helmet, and rode out of the lot with a mix of exhilaration and terror. His first attempt at riding the motorcycle to impress Claire was less than graceful. The engine sputtered ominously as he tried to navigate the crowded streets. Passers-by stared, some snickering, others frowning, as Ethan wobbled precariously on the bike. Every turn felt like a gamble, every stop a potential disaster. His palms sweated inside the helmet. Finally, he spotted Claire walking along the waterfront, holding her tote bag and chatting animatedly with a friend. Ethan's heart leapt. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He revved the engine, intending to glide up beside her, casual and confident. But the motorcycle, perhaps protesting his inexperience, coughed and sputtered, then died entirely. Ethan tried to restart it, pushing the bike forward while grimacing, drawing attention from everyone around. Claire turned, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Ethan, bright red-faced, struggling with a motorcycle that had betrayed him spectacularly. Despite the chaos, she couldn't help but laugh, a soft, melodic sound that made Ethan's humiliation sting and thrill simultaneously. By the time he managed to push the bike to the curb, Ethan realized two things. One, motorcycles were dangerous, and two, confidence couldn't be bought. Claire approached, still chuckling, and offered him a teasing smile. Ethan bowed his head, muttering a sheepish apology, vowing silently that his next attempt at impressing her would be smarter and far less combustible. After the motorcycle debacle, Ethan was desperate for another idea to impress Claire, something cool but less catastrophic. He stumbled upon a tarot card app on his phone, promising insights into love and destiny. The app's colorful animations and mystical music gave him a thrill of hope. Maybe this would finally be his ticket to charm her. He decided to test it the next day at the bus stop, where Claire often lingered. Ethan fumbled with the app, swiping through digital cards while trying to appear casual. The screen displayed ominous imagery: the tower, the fool, the lovers. He tried to interpret them quickly, rehearsing clever phrases in his head. "Ah, Claire," he planned to say, "the cards foresee an adventurous romance." Reality, however, had other plans. Just as he attempted to glance at Claire and deliver his line, the app glitched, flipping to a random card titled "Beware of Foolish Risks." Ethan froze. Claire raised an eyebrow, her expression a mixture of amusement and curiosity. His cheeks flamed crimson. Not giving up, Ethan tried a second approach, a small tarot deck he had borrowed from a quirky boutique. He shuffled the cards nervously, accidentally scattering them across the sidewalk. Passers-by stepped over the cards, some chuckling, while Ethan scrambled to gather them. Claire crouched to help, laughing so hard her voice carried across the street. The final disaster came when he attempted to read her fortune aloud. His voice cracked, the cards slipped, and he dropped the deck entirely. Claire couldn't stop laughing, tears forming in the corners of her eyes, while Ethan buried his face in his hands, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Despite the humiliation, a strange warmth blossomed inside him. Claire had laughed, really laughed with him, not at him maliciously. And though the attempt was a spectacular failure, Ethan realized something important. Connection wasn't about grand gestures or mystical predictions. It was about being present, authentic, and, occasionally, delightfully human. After his tarot card fiasco, Ethan was determined to find a method to gain confidence, something that could finally make him appear charming, suave, and worthy of Claire's attention. That's when he stumbled upon a self-help guru online, a flashy YouTube personality named Max Sterling, who promised instant confidence, magnetic charisma, and love life mastery in 7 days. Ethan's eyes lit up. 7 days to a new, improved him? It sounded perfect. The first step involved practicing power poses in public. Ethan stood awkwardly on the street corner, legs spread wide, arms raised above his head in a victorious V-shape. Passers-by gave him odd looks, some laughing quietly, while he struggled to maintain balance and dignity. Next, Max's advice was to make bold eye contact with strangers and deliver a confident smile. Ethan tried it at Powell's City of Books, catching several readers off guard as he froze mid-smile, unsure how long to hold it. One elderly man muttered something about creepy behavior under his breath. Ethan panicked, retreating behind the stacks of novels. Undeterred, Ethan progressed to the final exercise, approaching a stranger and delivering a charming, impromptu compliment. He spotted Claire near the waterfront and rehearsed lines in his head. "You illuminate the world around you," he whispered under his breath. Mustering courage, he stepped forward, only to trip over a loose cobblestone and tumble forward, landing unceremoniously in a puddle. Claire's laughter rang out, her eyes sparkling as she rushed to help him up. Ethan's dignity was soaked, along with his hoodie. Despite the disasters, Ethan refused to give up. He tried mantra repetition, confident walking, and even practicing deep, controlled breathing while waving awkwardly at passers-by. Each attempt ended in more embarrassment than the last, but he clung to the hope that, eventually, one of these methods might actually work. By the end of the day, Ethan was exhausted, drenched, and mortified. But strangely, he felt a tiny spark of accomplishment. He hadn't won Claire's attention yet, but he was trying, and he was learning, even if it was the hard and hilariously public way. Ethan's repeated attempts to impress Claire had begun to take a visible toll on his social composure. Every brave action seemed to invite disaster. From tripping over pavement cracks to spilling coffee on his shoes, the city of Portland had become a stage for his comedic mishaps, and Claire, ever observant, was often a front-row audience. At the bus stop one rainy morning, Ethan attempted a dramatic entrance, walking with the exaggerated confidence he had learned from Max Sterling. He imagined Claire glancing up, captivated by his presence. Instead, he stepped on a slick patch of pavement, twisting his ankle slightly and sending his umbrella flying into the street. Claire ducked instinctively to avoid it, stifling laughter as Ethan scrambled to retrieve it, flustered and bright red. Even in small encounters, his crush became increasingly apparent. When Claire offered a friendly greeting, Ethan's voice cracked like a bad recording, his words stumbling over one another. If she laughed at something he said, he interpreted it as mockery. If she smiled warmly, he panicked, thinking she had discovered the magnitude of his infatuation. The pattern repeated daily. The more he tried to impress her, the more obvious his feelings became, and the harder it was to hide them. Friends and coworkers began to notice his awkwardness, whispering and chuckling as he fumbled through mundane interactions. Each embarrassment seemed magnified by the knowledge that Claire was near, observing quietly, enjoying the performance without ever intervening. Despite the public humiliation, a small, stubborn part of Ethan remained hopeful. He still longed to speak to Claire naturally, to impress her with something genuine rather than stunts or self-help exercises. Every mishap, while mortifying, reminded him that he cared deeply, and that, perhaps, true confidence would come not from tricks or gadgets, but from learning to be himself, flaws and all. After weeks of humiliating attempts to impress Claire, Ethan Parker found himself wandering aimlessly along the waterfront, lost in thought. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, another self-help app, perhaps, or maybe just a quiet place to nurse his bruised ego, when he noticed a small, weathered sign hanging outside a brick building. Colonel Whitman, Confidence and Life Skills Coaching. Curiosity piqued, Ethan stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of leather, polished wood, and old books. Behind the desk sat a man in his 70s, sharp-eyed and impeccably dressed, exuding authority and calm. His posture was perfect, his presence commanding yet approachable. Ethan's chest tightened. This was the kind of confidence he had only seen in movies or in Ryan Caldwell. "Can I help you?" the colonel asked, voice steady and direct. Ethan shuffled his feet, fumbling for words. I'm looking for, guidance," he stammered. I want to be more confident." The colonel raised an eyebrow, studying him carefully. "Confidence isn't given, young man," he said, leaning back. "It's earned through action, discipline, and self-awareness. But I might be able to help someone like you if you're willing to work." Ethan nodded eagerly, nearly tripping over his own excitement. They spent the next hour in discussion. The colonel asked pointed questions about Ethan's habits, fears, and awkward encounters with Claire. He listened carefully, offering occasional chuckles at Ethan's candid admissions. Ethan felt a spark of hope, a possibility that he could finally change, not through apps or gimmicks, but through real, tangible effort. By the time Ethan left, the colonel's words echoed in his mind. The timid can become heroes, but only if they are willing to take the first step. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of control over his fate, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could transform from the bumbling admirer into someone worthy of Claire's attention. The following morning, Ethan returned to Colonel Whitman's office, his nerves jangling with anticipation. He had spent hours rehearsing his request. "Please, sir, teach me, make me confident, help me win Claire's heart." As he entered, the colonel regarded him with the same sharp, discerning eyes, folding his hands across his desk. "You've decided to take this seriously?" the colonel asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Yes, sir. I want to learn. I
I want to be confident. I want to approach Claire without tripping over myself, without being invisible." The colonel nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, steepling his fingers. "I will mentor you. But understand this, confidence is not about impressing others. It's about knowing yourself, taking action despite fear, and learning to navigate life with awareness and courage. If you're willing to commit fully, I can help you transform."
Ethan nearly jumped out of his chair in excitement. "I'll do anything, sir. Seriously." The colonel's eyes twinkled with humor. "Good. Then prepare yourself for unconventional training, young man. Your comfort zone will be challenged, your patience tested, and your awkwardness, well, it will be thoroughly scrutinized." Ethan nodded, a mix of dread and exhilaration coursing through him. This was exactly the structure he needed, the guidance he had been searching for after weeks of disasters. He left the office with a new sense of purpose, a plan forming in his mind. He would follow the colonel's guidance, endure whatever strange exercises awaited, and emerge a man capable of standing tall in front of Claire. The colonel's words echoed in his mind. Courage is not the absence of fear, Parker. It is action despite fear. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Colonel Whitman's small training facility, a converted warehouse near the waterfront. The colonel greeted him with a firm handshake, an expression that promised both discipline and amusement. "Today, we begin," he said, "with exercises that may seem unusual, even ridiculous, but every task has purpose." The first exercise involved walking through a crowded street while maintaining eye contact with strangers and speaking affirmations aloud. Ethan immediately tripped over a curb, nearly colliding with a hot dog vendor who gave him a skeptical glare. The colonel simply chuckled. "Purpose, Parker. Confidence is built through action, not embarrassment avoidance." Next came impromptu public speaking. Ethan had to approach random pedestrians and deliver a 1-minute spiel about imaginary products, a singing toaster, a self-cleaning backpack, a pet rock that sings your mood. His delivery was awkward, stumbling over words, hands flailing. Some pedestrians laughed, others ignored him, but the colonel noted every detail, pointing out where Ethan stiffened and where genuine humor shone through. Finally, the colonel introduced physical courage exercises, simple yet nerve-inducing tasks like jumping from small platforms into shallow pools of water, balancing along narrow beams, and shadowboxing with padded dummies. Ethan flailed, slipped, and splashed repeatedly, his face turning beet red each time. Yet with each attempt, he felt a tiny spark of empowerment, a reminder that he was capable of pushing boundaries, even if it was comically messy. By the end of the day, Ethan was exhausted, drenched, and sore, yet something had shifted. The laughter that had accompanied each mishap wasn't mockery, it was part of the process. Colonel Whitman's unconventional methods were slowly chipping away at his timidity, replacing fear with cautious confidence. Ethan left the facility, wobbling slightly but grinning. For the first time in months, he felt the faint stirrings of transformation. The path ahead would be bizarre, messy, and humbling. But for the first time, he believed he could walk it, stride by stride, toward Claire. Ethan sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor of Colonel Whitman's training room, listening intently as the retired officer paced slowly in front of him. "Confidence isn't something you can buy or fake," the colonel began, voice steady and commanding. "It comes from knowing your worth, understanding your values, and embracing your imperfections." Ethan nodded, trying to absorb every word. He had spent months chasing external symbols, motorcycles, apps, and self-help gimmicks, believing that confidence could be manufactured. Now, under Whitman's guidance, he began to understand that true confidence came from within. The colonel handed Ethan a small notebook. "Write down your strengths, Parker. List the qualities that make you unique. Then, write the things you fear most, but face them on paper, without judgment. Clarity builds courage.
Ethan scribbled hesitantly, noting his kindness, his curiosity, and even his quirky humor. He also wrote his fears: rejection, embarrassment, invisibility. The exercise felt awkward, almost silly, but he felt a weight lift as he acknowledged both sides of himself.
Next came discussions on self-talk. Every thought shapes your reality, Whitman said. If you constantly belittle yourself, you reinforce fear. If you speak to yourself with respect, you reinforce strength. Practice internal dialogue as though you were advising a friend, because in truth, you are. Ethan repeated the affirmations aloud. I am capable. I am worthy. I can face fear. His voice wavered at first, but gradually steadied with conviction. The colonel concluded with a lesson in perspective. Life is not a series of perfect moments. It's a collection of choices. Confidence is choosing to act despite uncertainty, despite fear, despite failure. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a mix of resolve, curiosity, and hope. The philosophy lessons weren't flashy, weren't comedic, but they planted a seed that courage was possible, even for a painfully shy man who had once believed he was destined to remain invisible. By the end of the session, Ethan left the room quieter than usual, yet brimming with a subtle strength. He was learning that confidence was not about impressing others. It was about standing tall in his own truth, ready to face the world, and Claire, with newfound courage. Colonel Whitman's training moved from theory to action the next morning. Knowing your worth is one thing, he said, arms crossed, but expressing it is another. Today, we focus on practical skills, social interactions, assertiveness, and body language. Ethan swallowed nervously, unsure whether he was ready, but he was determined to try. The first exercise involved approaching strangers in a local park and initiating casual conversation. Ethan fumbled at first, mumbling awkward greetings and tripping over words. The colonel's sharp gaze and quick corrections guided him. Maintain eye contact, keep shoulders relaxed, smile genuinely. Slowly, Ethan's confidence grew. He learned the subtle power of mirroring gestures, nodding to show attentiveness, and keeping a relaxed but upright posture. Next came role-playing. Whitman posed as various characters: an intimidating coworker, a skeptical cafe barista, a teasing stranger, forcing Ethan to respond assertively. At first, Ethan stuttered and stammered, backing down from every challenge. But with each round, he practiced speaking clearly, standing firm, and asserting his boundaries without aggression. By the end, even the colonel nodded with approval at his progress. The final lesson involved body language, leaning slightly forward to show interest, using open gestures, and maintaining a calm, confident stance. Ethan practiced in front of a mirror, exaggerating initially, then refining the motions until they felt natural. He realized that confidence wasn't just internal. It could be projected through posture, movement, and subtle cues that influenced how others perceived him. By the end of the day, Ethan felt a tangible difference. His chest felt less tight, his shoulders more relaxed, and his voice carried a steadier tone. For the first time in months, he imagined himself walking up to Claire and speaking without panic or fumbling. The colonel's practical training had given him tools, not just to impress others, but to navigate the world with poise, self-assurance, and authenticity. Ethan left the session energized, realizing that confidence wasn't magic. It was practice, patience, and courage in motion. For the first time, he felt ready to step closer to the life he wanted, and to the woman he secretly admired. After weeks under Colonel Whitman's guidance, Ethan began tentatively testing his newfound skills in real life. He was still painfully shy, still prone to awkward stumbles, but there was a subtle shift, a small spark of courage that hadn't existed before. His first attempt came at Powell's City of Books. Spotting Claire browsing through a display of poetry, Ethan took a deep breath and approached, keeping his shoulders back and voice steady. Hi, Claire," he said, his words slightly rushed but clear. She turned, raising an eyebrow in curiosity.
Instead of fumbling or retreating, Ethan managed a small, genuine smile. It wasn't perfect. His hand brushed the edge of a table and nearly sent a stack of books tumbling, but he recovered, keeping his composure. Over the next few days, he tested his skills in smaller, everyday interactions. At the cafe, he ordered his coffee with a newfound confidence, meeting the barista's eyes and nodding naturally. In the park, he struck up casual conversations with strangers, making jokes that were rough around the edges but comprehensible, and received smiles in return. Each minor success reinforced his belief that he could act despite fear. The change wasn't dramatic. It was subtle and awkward, marked by hesitations and occasional stumbles. Yet Ethan could feel the difference in how people responded. When he caught Claire's glance across the street, he no longer shrank immediately. He held her gaze for a moment longer, noticing her soft, amused smile, and a warmth spread through him that felt new and exhilarating. Ethan's first signs of change weren't about flawless execution or instant charisma. They were about action, resilience, and small victories. Every step he took, no matter how clumsy, reminded him that courage wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, taking risks, and believing in himself. And for the first time in months, he felt that he might actually have a chance, not just to be noticed, but to connect with Claire on his own terms. If confidence began inside, Ethan realized, it could also be reflected outwardly. With Colonel Whitman's encouragement, he decided it was time for a makeover. Not an extreme transformation, but a series of subtle changes that projected self-assurance. First came posture. He practiced standing tall, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, and breathing deeply to convey confident calm. The mirror sessions were initially comical. Ethan straightened, tilted, and leaned, making exaggerated faces as he tried to internalize the correct stance. By the end of the week, the awkward poses felt natural, almost like second nature.
Next was style. Ethan experimented with clothes that were simple but tailored, adding subtle colors that complemented his complexion. Gone were the oversized hoodies and wrinkled shirts. In their place, crisp button-downs, fitted jackets, and polished shoes. He even learned to accessorize with a watch, something small that made him feel more deliberate, more composed. Each change, while minor, seemed to shift the way he carried himself and the way others noticed him. Finally, he practiced small gestures, making deliberate eye contact, offering genuine smiles, and using subtle hand movements when speaking. The colonel had emphasized that charisma often lived in the details: an attentive nod, a relaxed stance, or a careful pause. Ethan rehearsed these gestures in front of mirrors, on bus rides, and during solitary walks, slowly integrating them into his natural behavior. By the end of the week, Ethan felt a subtle transformation. He wasn't just a shy young man hiding behind his insecurities anymore. He was someone who could move through the world with presence. Looking at his reflection, he caught himself smiling, feeling a hint of pride. Confidence wasn't fully mastered yet, but he could sense it growing. Each subtle shift in style, posture, and gesture brought him closer to the person he wanted to be, someone capable of approaching Claire with authenticity, courage, and even charm. After weeks of unconventional training and subtle transformations, Ethan Parker felt a flicker of courage he hadn't experienced in years. The real test, he realized, was Claire Henderson herself, approaching her, speaking naturally, and letting glimpses of confidence show without overthinking or fumbling. It started at the bus stop one crisp morning. Claire was absorbed in her phone, earbuds in, the soft hum of the city around her. Ethan approached with measured steps, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted. "Good morning, Claire," he said clearly, his voice calm and steady. Her eyes flicked up, a small, surprised smile forming. "Morning, Ethan," she replied, warmth lacing her tone. It was simple, brief, but for him, monumental. Over the next few days, he sought subtle opportunities to interact. At Powell's City of Books, he recommended a novel she might enjoy, keeping his tone light, his posture relaxed. Claire accepted the suggestion with an amused, approving nod.
At the waterfront, when she paused to admire a street musician, Ethan casually commented on the melody, his voice more confident than it had been weeks ago. Each interaction was brief, unassuming, and slightly awkward, but that awkwardness was now accompanied by a new steadiness that hadn't been there before. The most important shift was internal. Ethan no longer froze in fear of embarrassment. Even small mistakes, a misplaced word, a stumbled sentence, didn't send him retreating in panic. He was beginning to realize that confidence wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, being present, and letting your authentic self shine through. Claire noticed the subtle changes too. She caught the occasional confident glances, the upright posture, the slightly quicker smile, and she found herself intrigued. Ethan was still shy, still awkward at times, but there was a spark now, an emerging presence that hinted he was no longer the timid man who once watched her from afar. By the end of the day, Ethan walked away from each encounter with quiet satisfaction. Testing the waters wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about small steps that collectively built courage, and he was finally moving forward. Just as Ethan began to taste the first fruits of his newfound confidence, Ryan Caldwell reappeared in the mix, as effortlessly charming as ever. Ethan spotted him at the bus stop one afternoon, offering Claire a playful wave as she climbed onto his sleek electric scooter. Ethan's chest tightened, a familiar pang of insecurity threatening to resurface. But this time was different. Instead of panicking or retreating, Ethan inhaled deeply and reminded himself of Colonel Whitman's lessons. Confidence wasn't about competing directly with Ryan. It was about being present, assertive, and true to himself. He stayed on the sidewalk, pretending to casually scroll through his phone while keeping an eye on the duo. Ryan's charm was undeniable. He laughed easily, teased Claire with smooth wit, and seemed completely at ease in her company. Ethan felt the old familiar surge of inadequacy, but he also noticed something he hadn't before. Ryan's perfection made Ethan realize the value of authenticity. He didn't need to mimic Ryan, he needed to be his own man. When Ryan offered Claire another ride, Ethan subtly positioned himself nearby, standing tall, shoulders back, maintaining eye contact when she glanced his way. Claire noticed, her curiosity piqued by this new, steadier presence. Ethan didn't overdo it, no dramatic gestures, no desperate attempts to impress. Instead, he let his posture, calm demeanor, and attentive gaze do the talking.
The tension between the two men created a delicate, unspoken competition, but Ethan's approach was different. He wasn't trying to outshine Ryan. He was simply showing Claire that he could be confident in his own way. It was a subtle shift, one that required restraint, patience, and courage, the very qualities he had been cultivating with Whitman's guidance. By the end of the encounter, Ethan walked away with a quiet satisfaction. Ryan might still have the flash and charisma, but Ethan had something equally valuable: self-assurance. For the first time, he felt he could meet Claire on equal footing, not by imitating someone else, but by finally being himself. Ethan Parker's heart pounded as he stepped onto the bustling streets of downtown Portland. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for under Colonel Whitman's guidance for weeks. No apps, no gimmicks, no last-minute stunts. Just him facing his fears and Claire Henderson. He spotted her near the fountain, sunlight glinting off her hair as she laughed with a friend. The old pang of nervousness rose in his chest, but he drew in a steadying breath, recalling Whitman's lessons: stand tall, speak clearly, embrace the fear instead of running from it. Ethan approached cautiously, mind rehearsing the words he would say. "Hi, Claire," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the tremor in his stomach. She looked up, eyes widening in recognition. Her smile was warm, encouraging, but she remained curious, waiting to see what this formerly timid young man would do next. I wanted to say," Ethan faltered for a brief moment, then straightened. "I really enjoy spending time around you. Even if it's just seeing you at the bus stop or Powell's, I guess I just wanted to tell you that I like you a lot." His words tumbled out, a mixture of vulnerability and newfound courage.
Claire blinked, her amusement tempered with surprise. For once, Ethan wasn't awkwardly hiding or fumbling. He was standing firm, facing his fear, and speaking honestly. A small crowd of passers-by moved around them, but Ethan felt like they were in their own bubble, the city fading into the background. When he finished, there was a pause, a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Then Claire's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Ethan, I've noticed you," she said softly, almost teasingly, "and I think it's about time you stopped hiding." Ethan exhaled, a wave of relief and exhilaration washing over him. The downtown showdown wasn't about grand gestures or flashy tricks. It was about courage, honesty, and taking the first step. For the first time, he felt in control of his feelings and his destiny. Claire Henderson watched Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. The shy, awkward young man who had once fumbled his words and tripped over his own feet had been replaced by someone different. Not perfect, not polished like Ryan Caldwell, but somehow undeniably appealing in a quiet, authentic way. The change wasn't dramatic. There were still hints of nervousness, but there was an unmistakable charm in the way Ethan held himself, spoke with sincerity, and made eye contact without averting his gaze. He laughed easily, no longer hiding behind awkward gestures or forced humor. Every small movement suggested confidence tempered by humility, courage accompanied by vulnerability. As Ethan spoke about trivial things, books he liked, the music playing nearby, small observations about the city, Claire noticed how his words flowed naturally, without hesitation. There was no pretense, no desperate attempt to impress. He simply existed in the moment, aware and attentive, and it drew her in. For Claire, this authenticity was refreshing. She had grown used to grand gestures and effortless charm from people like Ryan, but Ethan's transformation had a different effect. It was human, relatable, and surprisingly magnetic. The shy pauses, the slight stumbles in conversation, all added to his endearing appeal. By the end of their interaction, Claire found herself intrigued and impressed. The timid observer she had watched from a distance was now someone fully present, radiating confidence without arrogance. She realized that true charm wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing oneself, flaws and all.
As Ethan walked away that afternoon, Claire couldn't help but smile to herself. She had noticed the transformation, and something about it made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she was seeing Ethan, not the timid admirer, but the man he was becoming. Ryan Caldwell noticed the subtle shift immediately. The timid Ethan Parker, who had once hovered on the edges of conversations, avoiding eye contact and shrinking under pressure, was now standing taller, speaking more confidently, and navigating social interactions with ease. Ryan's competitive instincts kicked in. He didn't feel threatened outright. He was still charismatic, witty, and smooth, but this new Ethan posed a fresh challenge. Claire had begun noticing him in a way she hadn't before, and Ryan realized he could no longer rely on effortless charm alone. Their first encounter since Ethan's transformation occurred at a downtown cafe. Ryan approached with his usual confident grin, but he observed Ethan calmly greeting Claire, offering a small joke that made her laugh. There was a poised energy about Ethan now, something Ryan hadn't anticipated. "Looks like someone's been busy," Ryan said, sliding into the seat across from Ethan. There was a friendly tone, but a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken rivalry in the air. Ethan met his gaze steadily, no hesitation or discomfort, and offered a courteous nod. "You could say that," he replied, voice calm, measured, and confident. For Ryan, the challenge was exhilarating. He respected Ethan's growth, recognizing the effort it must have taken to reach this point. But the rivalry was now real, a test of charm, authenticity, and subtle influence over Claire's attention. As they exchanged playful banter, Claire watched with interest. The tension wasn't hostile, it was charged, exciting, and dynamic. Ethan, for the first time, wasn't just reacting. He was actively participating, holding his ground, and demonstrating that confidence could be cultivated, even by someone who had once seemed incapable of asserting himself.
By the end of the encounter, both men left with a mutual understanding. The game had changed. Ryan had met his match in a quiet, steady way, and Ethan had proved that persistence, courage, and authenticity could shift the balance, even in the presence of natural charisma and effortless charm. Ethan Parker took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves in his chest. After weeks of awkward mishaps, comedic failures, and rigorous training under Colonel Whitman, he was finally ready. No motorcycles, no self-help apps, no fortune-telling, just honesty, courage, and the man he had become. He spotted Claire waiting at the bus stop, the morning sunlight highlighting her soft features. She glanced up, smiling, and Ethan felt a surge of warmth. With steady steps, he approached, shoulders squared, posture confident yet natural. His mind raced, rehearsing the words that had been forming in his heart. "Claire," he began, voice clear and calm, "I need to tell you something." Her eyes widened, curious. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before continuing. "I like you. I've liked you for a long time, from the first moment I saw you at this bus stop. I wanted to tell you honestly, without tricks or gimmicks, that you've become someone incredibly important to me, and I hope you feel the same way." He exhaled, letting the words hang in the crisp Portland air. For a moment, nothing happened. Ethan's heart pounded, fear and hope colliding. But then Claire's laughter, warm and melodic, broke the tension. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping closer, "I've known for a while, and I think you finally realized what I saw all along." Ethan blinked, heart leaping. Her hand brushed his, casual but intentional, and he felt the warmth of connection he had longed for. There was no rivalry, no games, just two people standing honestly before each other, acknowledging feelings that had been quietly growing for months. For Ethan, this moment was the culmination of every awkward stumble, every failed experiment, every lesson in courage. He had faced his fears, embraced his flaws, and shown his authentic self. And now, for the first time, he wasn't just admired from afar, he was truly seen. Claire Henderson's eyes sparkled as she looked at Ethan, amusement and affection mingling in her gaze. The bus stop, the city streets, the scattered early morning commuters, all faded into the background. For once, it wasn't about awkward glances, timid stares, or failed attempts at impressing someone. It was just them, in a bubble of shared understanding and burgeoning romance. Ethan couldn't stop smiling. The shy, hesitant young man who had once tripped over cobblestones, spilled coffee, and awkwardly followed Claire through Powell's City of Books had transformed. Confidence, courage, and authenticity radiated from him, not in a showy, flashy way, but in the quiet, genuine strength that made Claire's heart flutter. They walked together along the waterfront, exchanging playful banter and laughter. Every step felt lighter, every glance more intimate. Claire teased him gently about past mishaps, and Ethan laughed, recalling each ridiculous, humiliating adventure. Instead of embarrassment, he felt pride for surviving, growing, and finally finding his place beside her. The rivalry with Ryan no longer mattered. Ethan had discovered that charm and confidence weren't about competing, they were about being true to oneself. Claire held his hand, squeezing gently, and Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of completion. The journey from timid admiration to mutual affection was messy, comedic, and beautiful. Finally, under the soft glow of Portland's morning light, Ethan stopped and looked at Claire with a mixture of nervousness and certainty. "I promise," he said softly, "to keep being me, even when it's awkward or imperfect." Claire laughed, leaning in closer. "That's exactly why I like you, Ethan. That's exactly why I like you." And just like that, laughter, warmth, and a shared sense of triumph filled the air. Love had won. Not flashy stunts, not forced charm, but authenticity, courage, and the courage to embrace one's true self. Ethan's growth was complete, and together, they stepped forward into a bright, comedic, and undeniably romantic future.